Spread wider. I'm not stopping until my seed takes root. The lonely 70-year-old rancher had lived 15 years as a ghost in his own house after his wife died. But this 58-year-old widow who'd come to keep his house had ignited something in him that age was supposed to have killed, something primal and desperate and absolutely refusing to fade quietly into old age. Magnolia's body trembled as the 70-year-old rancher moved against her with an intensity that made her forget she was supposed to be past this, past desire, past the raw need that now consumed them both in the hay-sweet darkness. "I can't," she'd whispered when he'd first cornered her against the barn wall, his 70 years evident in silver hair and weathered skin, but utterly meaningless in the burning hunger of his eyes. "I'm 58. You're 70. This is insane." But Silas Thornwood had silenced her protests with a kiss that proved desire doesn't care about calendars, and when he'd spread her legs wider and promised he wouldn't stop until his seed took root in her womb. Impossible, medically absurd, biologically laughable. Something in Magnolia's carefully controlled widow's heart had shattered and reformed around one truth. With this 70-year-old rancher, age had become meaningless, and desire had become eternal. But what desperation had driven a 70-year-old man to claim his housekeeper with such raw intensity after 15 years of celibate loneliness? What hunger burned in the 58-year-old widow that made her surrender to the impossible promise of bearing a child at an age when her body should have forgotten how? And what would happen when the rancher's nephew, who'd been counting on inheriting everything, discovered that the lonely 70-year-old man was planting more than crops with the widow who'd taken him so completely that mortality itself seemed like just another obstacle to overcome? 6 hours earlier, Magnolia had been scrubbing dishes in Silas Thornwood's kitchen, her hands deep in soapy water that smelled like lye and hard work, when she'd heard the shouting from the front parlor. She'd worked as his housekeeper for 6 months now, ever since her own small ranch had been foreclosed, after Harold's death left her with nothing but debt and the clothes on her back. The job was simple enough: cook, clean, tend the vegetable garden, pretend not to notice how the 70-year-old rancher watched her with eyes that burned with something she'd thought died when Harold's heart gave out 3 years ago. Silas Thornwood was a good employer, paid fair wages, never touched her inappropriately, but God help her. Sometimes Magnolia caught herself wishing he would. The thought made her face burn with shame even now. She was 58 years old, a respectable widow, too old for such foolishness. But there was something about the way Silas moved through his days, all lean muscle and controlled power, despite 7 decades of living, that made her body remember things it had no business remembering. The shouting grew louder, and Magnolia recognized the second voice: Cornelius Thornwood, Silas's nephew, a dissolute man of 45 who visited the ranch every few months like a vulture circling a dying animal. She dried her hands on her apron and moved quietly toward the parlor, not meaning to eavesdrop, but unable to stop herself. "You can't be serious, Uncle," Cornelius was saying, his voice sharp with panic and rage. "You're 70 years old. The terms of the will are clear. If you die without a legitimate heir, the ranch goes to me. You've had 15 years to remarry, to produce children, and you've done nothing, except reality. This land will be mine." Magnolia heard the creak of Silas's chair as he stood, and when he spoke, his voice carried the kind of cold fury that made grown men step back. "The terms say I have 6 months to produce proof of an heir, Cornelius. I've got until the end of November. That's 5 months from now. Plenty of time." Cornelius laughed, ugly and mocking. "An heir? You're 70 years old, Uncle Silas. Even if you could find some desperate woman willing to marry you for your money, which is doubtful given your age and temperament, the chances of actually siring a child at your age are laughable. You're shooting blanks, old man. Have been for years, probably. Just sign the papers now and save us both the embarrassment of watching you fail." The sound of glass shattering made Magnolia jump. Through the crack in the door, she saw Silas had thrown his whiskey glass against the stone fireplace, and his face was carved from pure rage. "Get out of my house, get off my land, and don't come back until you're ready to accept that this ranch will never be yours." Cornelius moved toward the door, and Magnolia barely had time to step back before he burst through, his face twisted with calculation and fury. He saw her standing there, knew she'd heard everything, and his smile was poison-sweet. "Mrs. Ashwood, still playing housekeeper for my uncle, I see. Tell me, has he made you any indecent proposals yet, offered to make you the next Mrs. Thornwood in exchange for trying to give him the impossible heir he so desperately needs?" The words hit like a slap, and Magnolia felt heat flood her face. "Mr. Thornwood has been nothing but respectful to me," she said stiffly. "Good. Keep it that way. Because if my uncle is fool enough to try using you in some desperate scheme to produce an heir, I'd hate to see you humiliated when it inevitably fails. You seem like a decent woman, Mrs. Ashwood. Too decent to be used as breeding stock by a 70-year-old man clinging to delusions of virility." He tipped his hat mockingly and strode out, leaving Magnolia standing in the hallway with her heart pounding and her mind racing. Behind her, she heard Silas emerge from the parlor, and when she turned, the look on his face made her breath catch. He wasn't angry anymore. He was calculating, desperate, and when his eyes met hers, Magnolia saw the exact moment he made his decision. "Mrs. Ashwood," he said quietly. "Magnolia, I need to speak with you. Please." She followed him back into the parlor, her pulse hammering in her throat. Silas poured himself another whiskey with hands that shook slightly, the only sign of his 70 years, and downed it in one swallow before turning to face her. "You heard everything." It wasn't a question. Magnolia nodded, unable to form words. Silas ran one weathered hand through his silver hair, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked old. Not weak, never weak, but genuinely old, facing mortality and finding it unacceptable. "I'm going to ask you something inappropriate," he said. "Something that will probably offend you. You're within your rights to leave immediately, and I'll pay you 3 months' wages as severance. But before you decide, I need you to understand something." He moved closer, and Magnolia found herself rooted to the spot, unable to step back even though propriety demanded it. "I've been alone for 15 years. 15 years of sleeping in a bed that's too big, eating meals in silence, watching the sunset over this land. I've spent my whole life building and knowing that when I die, everything I've worked for goes to that worthless nephew who'll drink it away or gamble it away within 5 years. I told myself it didn't matter. Told myself I was too old for marriage, too old for children, too old for the messy complications of love and desire and building a future with someone. And then you came to work here." Magnolia's throat went dry. Silas was standing close enough now that she could smell leather and sage and something uniquely him, and the look in his eyes was doing dangerous things to her carefully maintained composure. "Mr. Thornwood, let me finish, please." His voice gentled. "For 6 months I've watched you move through my house, bringing life back to rooms that have been dead for 15 years. I've watched you laugh at my bad jokes and scold me for tracking mud across your clean floors and tend my garden like it matters to you. And somewhere along the way, Magnolia Ashwood, you woke something up in me that I thought was buried with my wife. Something that doesn't care that I'm 70 and you're 58. Something that looks at you and sees not a housekeeper, but a woman. A beautiful, strong, capable woman who makes me feel alive for the first time in 15 years. The words hung between them like a confession and a plea, and Magnolia felt tears prick her eyes because she understood exactly what he meant. Harold had been a good husband, kind and steady, but he'd never looked at her the way Silas was looking at her now, like she was water in the desert, like she was salvation itself. "What are you asking me?" she whispered. Silas took a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. "Marry me. Not for love, though God knows I'm halfway there already. Not for money, though you'd never want for anything again. Marry me because I need an heir to save this ranch, and you're the only woman I've met in 15 years that I can imagine building a future with. Marry me and let me try, knowing it's medically improbable, knowing we're both decades past the age when this should be possible. Let me try to give you a child, our child. Let me plant my seed in you and pray to whatever God still listens that it takes root." The proposal was raw and desperate and completely insane, and Magnolia should have said no, should have walked out of that parlor, packed her bags, and never looked back. But instead, she heard herself ask, "Why me? You could find a younger woman, someone actually capable of bearing children." Silas's smile was sad and knowing. "I don't want a younger woman, Magnolia. I want you. I want your strength and your stubbornness and the way you look at the sunrise like it's a gift instead of just another day to endure. I want to spend whatever time I have left making you feel cherished instead of useful, making you feel desired instead of convenient. And yes, I want to try for a child with you, knowing the odds are against us. Because even if we fail, even if biology and age conspire against us, at least I'll have tried. At least I'll have spent my final years with a woman who makes me remember what it feels like to want something more than my next breath." Magnolia looked at this 70-year-old rancher with his silver hair and scarred hands and eyes that burned with more life than men half his age possessed, and she made a choice that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "I'm 58 years old," she said. "My body hasn't bled in 3 years. The chances of conception are almost zero. I could try for the rest of my life and give you nothing but failure and heartbreak." "Then we'll fail together," Silas said simply. "Is that a yes?" Magnolia felt something crack open in her chest, some wall she'd built after Harold died, some protection against ever feeling this vulnerable again. "Ask me properly," she heard herself say, "on your knee, like it matters, like I matter." And this 70-year-old rancher, who'd survived 7 decades of Montana winters and the death of his first wife, and 15 years of bone-deep loneliness, lowered himself to one knee in his own parlor and took her work-roughened hands in his. "Magnolia Ashwood, will you marry me? Will you let me spend whatever time we have left trying to build something neither of us thought we'd ever have again? Will you give me the chance to prove that 70 and 58 are just numbers and desire doesn't give a damn about calendars?" "Yes," Magnolia whispered, and then louder, stronger, "Yes, Silas, I'll marry you." He stood and pulled her into his arms, and when he kissed her, it wasn't gentle or tentative or the kind of kiss old people were supposed to share. It was fierce and hungry and absolutely unashamed, and Magnolia found herself kissing him back with a passion she'd thought died with her youth. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Silas rested his forehead against hers. "Tonight," he said roughly. "I don't want to wait for ceremonies or propriety or any of the things people will expect. Tonight, Magnolia. Let me make you mine tonight." She should have said no, should have insisted on marriage first, on respectability, on all the things a 58-year-old widow was supposed to demand. But looking into Silas's eyes, seeing the desperate hunger there that matched her own, Magnolia threw propriety to the wind. "The barn," she heard herself say, "after dark, where no one can see, where it's just you and me and this impossible thing we're about to try." And that's how, 6 hours after Cornelius's visit, Magnolia found herself in the barn with lamplight turning everything golden, with Silas's hands on her body and his voice commanding her to spread wider, promising he wouldn't stop until his seed took root. That's how age became meaningless and desire became eternal, in the hay-sweet darkness where two people who should have been past this discovered that passion doesn't care about wrinkles or gray hair or the years that separate youth from wisdom. 3 months had passed since that first night in the barn, and Magnolia stood in front of the mirror in what was now their bedroom, one hand pressed to her lower belly where something impossible was happening. The nausea had started 2 weeks ago, subtle at first, just a slight queasiness in the mornings that she'd blamed on bad bacon or spoiled milk, but it had grown stronger, more insistent, until she found herself retching into the chamber pot every dawn while Silas held her hair back with those weathered 70-year-old hands and whispered reassurances that sounded more like prayers. She was late, 6 weeks late, and her breasts were tender, swollen, sensitive to even the softest touch of her nightgown. Magnolia knew these signs, had felt them twice before when she'd carried her daughter Josephine 35 years ago and lost a second baby at 3 months 28 years past. But that was impossible now. She was 58 years old. Her body had stopped bleeding 3 years ago. Every medical text she'd ever read said conception at her age was virtually impossible, and even if it happened, carrying to term was dangerous, potentially fatal. But her body didn't care about medical texts. Her body was doing something it had no business doing, and the terror and hope warring in Magnolia's chest made it hard to breathe. Behind her, reflected in the mirror, Silas emerged from the washroom, his silver hair damp from shaving, his 70-year-old body still lean and powerful in the morning light streaming through their window. 3 months of marriage had made him familiar in ways that still shocked her. The particular way he moved in the mornings, the sound of his breathing when he slept beside her, the taste of his skin when he made love to her with an intensity that never diminished. Every night, true to his word, Silas had claimed her with single-minded determination. Some nights were tender, slow explorations of bodies that had lived long enough to know what pleasure really meant. Other nights were raw and desperate, both of them acutely aware of time slipping away, of Silas's November deadline approaching like a noose, of their own mortality waiting patient and inevitable. "You're pale," Silas said immediately, crossing to her. His hands framed her face, tilting it toward the light, and his eyes, those burning blue eyes that had never stopped seeing her as beautiful despite her age, narrowed with concern. The sickness again? Magnolia nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Silas's hands dropped to her waist, then lower, splaying across her belly with reverent care that made tears spill hot down her cheeks. How long have you been late? His voice was rough with something that sounded dangerously like hope. 6 weeks, Magnolia whispered. Silas, I can't be certain, but I think your seed took root. I think I'm carrying your child. The sound that escaped him was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He dropped to his knees in front of her, pressing his weathered face against her belly, and his shoulders shook with emotion. He'd been holding back for 3 months of trying and hoping and refusing to give up. Are you certain? He asked against her nightgown. Should we send for Dr. Garrett? Not yet, Magnolia said, running her fingers through his silver hair. Not until I'm sure. Because, Silas, if I'm wrong, if this is just my body playing tricks, if I tell you we've succeeded and then lose it, then we try again, Silas said fiercely, looking up at her with tears streaming unashamed down his 70-year-old face, and again, until it takes or until my heart gives out, whichever comes first. But Magnolia, I can see it in your face, in the glow of your skin. You're not wrong. You're carrying my child, our child. The impossible miraculous proof that 70 and 58 are just numbers and biology can be beaten by sheer stubborn will. He stood and pulled her against his chest, and Magnolia felt his heart hammering beneath her cheek, felt the strength in arms that had held her through 3 months of passion and partnership, and the slow dawning realization that what started as a desperate arrangement had become something far more dangerous. Love. Real, terrifying, all-consuming love. But before she could tell him, before she could confess that somewhere between that first night in the barn and this morning's revelation, she'd fallen completely in love with this 70-year-old rancher who refused to fade quietly, the sound of breaking glass downstairs made them both freeze. Silas released her immediately, his hand reaching for the rifle he kept mounted by the bedroom door. Stay here, he ordered, already moving toward the stairs. But Magnolia grabbed her robe and followed, because 3 months of marriage had taught her that Silas Thornwood's protective instincts were as strong as his passion, and she'd be damned if she let him face danger alone. They found Cornelius in the parlor, standing amid shattered window glass with a revolver in his hand, and madness burning in his bloodshot eyes. 3 months of watching his inheritance slip away had turned him gaunt and desperate, his expensive suit hanging loose on a frame, wasted by whiskey and rage. Cornelius's gun hand trembled as he pointed the weapon vaguely in their direction, his eyes wild with the kind of desperation that makes men do terrible things. 3 months, he spat, his voice slurring slightly. 3 months you've been playing house with your housekeeper uncle, thinking you're so clever, thinking you can cheat me out of what's rightfully mine. Silas stepped in front of Magnolia, his 70-year-old body moving with surprising speed, putting himself between her and the gun. Get out of my house, Cornelius. You're drunk and you're making a fool of yourself. Cornelius laughed, high and unhinged. A fool? I'm not the fool here, old man. You're the fool if you think this charade is going to work. You're 70 years old, Uncle Silas? 70? And she's what, 60? Past menopause, past childbearing, past any reasonable hope of giving you what you need. His eyes cut to Magnolia with vicious calculation. Unless you've already figured that out. Unless this whole marriage is just for show, a desperate attempt to make me think you're trying when really you know it's impossible. Magnolia felt Silas's body tense in front of her, felt rage radiating off him like heat from a forge. But before he could speak, before he could do something that would get him shot, Magnolia stepped around him and faced Cornelius directly. The movement made nausea roll through her belly, but she swallowed it down and met her husband's nephew with steel in her spine. You're wrong, she said quietly. About everything. Your uncle isn't playing charade, and I'm not past anything. I'm carrying his child right now, 6 weeks along. So whatever claim you thought you had on this ranch, Cornelius Thornwood, you can let it die right here, right now, because come November, Silas will have his heir. The silence that followed was deafening. Cornelius's face went from red to white to purple, and the gun in his hand started shaking so badly Magnolia feared it would discharge accidentally. You're lying, he breathed. That's medically impossible. You're 58 years old. You can't. And yet here we are, Magnolia interrupted. Impossible or not, your uncle's seed took root in my womb, and in 6 months I'll deliver the baby that ends your inheritance dreams forever. She saw the exact moment Cornelius made his choice, saw murder flash across his face as he raised the gun with both hands and aimed it directly at her belly. Time seemed to slow. Silas moved like lightning despite his 70 years, shoving Magnolia behind him even as his own rifle came up. The two shots, Cornelius's wild, panicked, and Silas's calm and practiced, came so close together they sounded like one explosion in the enclosed parlor. Cornelius's bullet buried itself in the wall 3 feet from where they stood. Silas's bullet took his nephew in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending the revolver flying from his hand. Cornelius went down screaming, writhing on the floor among the broken glass, blood spreading across his expensive shirt. Magnolia found herself on the floor, Silas's body covering hers, his heart hammering against her back. "Are you hurt?" His voice was raw with terror. "Did he hit you? The baby?" "We're fine," Magnolia gasped. "Silas, we're both fine, but you're bleeding." She'd seen it when he'd turned to check on her, blood spreading across his left side, where Cornelius's wild shot hadn't missed completely after all. It had caught him just above the hip, not deep enough to be immediately fatal, but bad enough that his face had gone gray beneath his weathered tan. "It's nothing," Silas said, but his voice was weak, and when he summited, tried to stand, his legs buckled. Magnolia caught him, supporting his 70-year-old body with strength, born of pure terror and determination. She managed to get him into a chair, her hands pressing against the wound to slow the bleeding, while Cornelius continued to moan on the floor. "Mrs. Henderson!" Magnolia screamed toward the broken window, knowing their nearest neighbor lived a quarter-mile away but praying someone would hear. "Dr. Garrett, someone help!" Silas's hand covered hers where it pressed against his bleeding side. "Magnolia, listen to me. If I don't—" "Don't you dare!" She cut him off, tears streaming down her face. "Don't you dare give up on me now, Silas Thornwood. Not after everything. Not after getting me pregnant at 58 like you promised. Not after making me fall in love with you, you stubborn old fool. You don't get to die on me. I won't allow it." His weathered face softened despite the pain. "You love me." "Of course I love you," Magnolia sobbed. "How could I not? You saw me when I was invisible. You wanted me when I thought I was past wanting. You gave me back my life, Silas. You made me feel alive again. So no, you don't get to leave me now. We're going to raise this impossible baby together. We're going to prove everyone wrong together. We're going to grow old together, older, I mean, and you're going to keep planting your seed in me until we're both too old to move, just like you promised." Silas smiled, and even bleeding and pale, he was the most beautiful thing Magnolia had ever seen. "I'll hold you to that," he whispered. Then his eyes rolled back and he slumped in the chair, unconscious from blood loss. The next hours were a blur of terror and desperate prayer. Mrs. Henderson did hear the screams and came running with her husband and 2 ranch hands. Dr. Garrett arrived within the hour, his medical bag clutched in weathered hands, and worked over Silas with grim efficiency, while Magnolia paced and prayed and refused to leave the room despite everyone's insistence. The bullet had gone clean through, missing vital organs by inches. Blood loss was the danger now, and infection, and the simple fact that 70-year-old bodies didn't heal as quickly as young ones. "He's strong," Dr. Garrett said finally, washing blood from his hands. "Stronger than most men half his age, but the next few days are critical. He needs rest, no stress, and careful watching for fever." "He'll have all 3, Magnolia said fiercely. "I'll make certain of it." Dr. Garrett's eyes dropped to her belly, and something knowing flickered across his face. "Mrs. Thornwood, I couldn't help but notice. Are you experiencing any symptoms I should know about? Nausea, fatigue, missed monthly courses?" Magnolia's hand moved protectively to her stomach. "I'm pregnant. 6 weeks, I think. Maybe 7. I know it's impossible at my age, but—" "Improbable," Dr. Garrett corrected gently. "Not impossible. Rare, certainly. High risk? Absolutely. But I've delivered 3 babies to women over 55 in my 40 years of practice, and 2 of them survived to healthy births. If you're truly carrying, Mrs. Thornwood, you'll need careful monitoring. No stress, plenty of rest, good nutrition." He paused. "And you'll need to prepare yourself for the possibility that carrying to term at 58 may be more than your body can handle." "I'll handle it," Magnolia said with absolute certainty, "because giving up isn't an option. Not for me, not for this baby, and definitely not for the stubborn 70-year-old man who refused to let age stop him from living. We're going to make it, Dr. Garrett, all 3 of us. Because we're Montana timber, and Montana timber doesn't break." The sheriff came and took Cornelius away, along with a signed confession the nephew had babbled out while Dr. Garrett was digging the bullet from his shoulder. Attempted murder, conspiracy to defraud, and a dozen other charges that would see him locked away for years, long enough that he'd never threaten their family again. And when Silas finally woke 3 days later, weak but alive, the first thing he saw was Magnolia sitting beside his bed, her hand resting on the slight curve of her belly where their impossible child was growing. 6 months had crawled by like years, each day a battle against fear and hope and the medical impossibility growing larger in Magnolia's belly. Winter had come to Montana Territory with brutal cold and snow that piled waist-deep against the ranch house, and through it all, Magnolia's body had done what every doctor said it couldn't. It had nurtured life, grown strong instead of fragile, expanded with stubborn determination that matched the woman carrying the child. Now, in late April, with spring mud making the roads nearly impassable, Magnolia stood at the bedroom window watching dawn paint the mountains gold, one hand pressed to her enormous belly where their son, because Dr. Garrett had confirmed it was a boy, kicked with enthusiastic strength that suggested he'd inherited both parents' refusal to accept limitations. The labor pains had started yesterday afternoon, subtle at first, just a tightening across her belly that she'd tried to ignore. But they'd grown stronger through the night, more insistent, until she'd finally woken Silas at 3 a.m. with a whispered confession that their son was coming, whether the world was ready or not. Silas had moved with surprising speed for a 70-year-old man still recovering from a gunshot wound, sending their ranch hand racing through pre-dawn darkness to fetch Dr. Garrett and the midwife, building up the fire until the bedroom was warm as summer, boiling water and gathering clean linens with the efficient calm of a man who'd done this before, decades ago when his first wife had labored to bring a stillborn daughter into the world. But that history lived in his eyes now as he helped Magnolia back to the bed, as another contraction gripped her and she gasped against the pain, as he held her hand and whispered encouragement that sounded more like desperate prayer. "You can do this," he said, his weathered face lined with fear and love in equal measure. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known, Magnolia. 58 years old and carrying my child like it's the most natural thing in the world. You can do this." "What if I can't?" Magnolia gasped as the contraction peaked and released. "What if Dr. Garrett was right? What if my body is too old for this? What if something goes wrong? What if—" "Then we fight!" Silas interrupted fiercely. "We fight like we've fought everything else, together, stubborn, refusing to accept defeat. But you're not going to fail, Magnolia. I won't let you." Dr. Garrett arrived as the sun cleared the mountains, his medical bag clutched in one hand, and the midwife, a capable woman named Ruth, at his side. They took over with practiced efficiency, checking Magnolia's progress, timing contractions, speaking in low voices about dilation and position, and the baby's heartbeat that seemed strong and steady despite the impossibility of his existence. The hours that followed were pain and effort and the primal work of bringing life into the world. Magnolia labored, with the same fierce determination she brought to everything else, her 58-year-old body doing what it was built to do, regardless of what medical texts claimed was possible. Silas stayed beside her the entire time, his 70-year-old hands holding hers through contractions that made her scream, his voice constant and unwavering with encouragement and love and promises about their future. "Almost there," Ruth said as afternoon light slanted through the windows. "One more push, Mrs. Thornwood. Give me one more big push and you'll meet your son." Magnolia gathered every ounce of strength she had left, every stubborn refusal to give up that had carried her through 58 years of living, and pushed with everything in her. The sound that followed was the most beautiful thing Silas Thornwood had ever heard, a lusty, outraged cry that rattled the window panes and announced to the world that the impossible had just happened. "He's here," Ruth said, laughing and crying at the same time as she lifted the squalling, perfect baby and placed him on Magnolia's chest. "He's here, and he's healthy, and he's got lungs like a Montana storm. Congratulations, you two. You just rewrote every medical textbook in existence." Magnolia looked down at her son, impossibly small, impossibly perfect, with a shock of dark hair and his father's burning blue eyes already focusing on her face, and felt something complete inside her that she hadn't even known was broken. All the years of believing she was past this, past purpose, past the fundamental female ability to create life, all of it vanished in the face of this tiny miracle. "Samuel," she whispered, using the name they'd chosen together. "Samuel Silas Thornwood. So he knows he comes from strength and stubborn love, and two people who refused to let age tell them what was possible. Silas touched his son's tiny hand with one weathered finger, and the baby's grip closed around it with surprising strength. The sound that escaped the 70-year-old rancher was somewhere between a laugh and a sob, and when he looked at his wife, his face was wet with unashamed tears. "You did it," he whispered. "You carried my child at 58 and proved every single person who doubted us wrong. You're magnificent, Magnolia Thornwood, absolutely magnificent." "We did it," Magnolia corrected, reaching up to cup his weathered face. "Together, you planted your seed and refused to stop until it took root, just like you promised. And now we have forever, Silas. Not literally, because we're both too old for that kind of delusion, but forever enough. Long enough to raise our son, long enough to prove that desire really can be eternal when two people choose each other every single day." Dr. Garrett cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "I need to be honest with you both. What you've accomplished here is medically extraordinary. A 58-year-old woman carrying to term and delivering a healthy baby fathered by a 70-year-old man defies everything I learned in medical school. You're both in the record books now, whether you want to be or not. And Mrs. Thornwood, you need to understand, this was incredibly dangerous. Your body handled it beautifully, but attempting this again would be pushing your luck beyond all reason." Magnolia looked at Silas, saw the same thought in his eyes that was in her own heart, and they both started laughing. "Doctor," Silas said, grinning like a fool, "I appreciate the warning, but I didn't stop until my seed took root the first time, and I'm not planning to stop now. If my wife is willing, if her body can handle it, we're going to keep trying. Keep planting seeds. Keep proving that 70 and 58 are just numbers and passion doesn't care about medical textbooks." "Until we're both too old to move," Magnolia added, her eyes never leaving her husband's face. "That was the promise, wasn't it? Every night until we're both too old to move. Well, I can still move just fine, Silas Thornwood, so I expect you to keep your promise." 2 years later, when Samuel was joined by twin daughters, Grace and Clara, named for the women who'd shaped Silas's life, Dr. Garrett would shake his head in wonder and stop trying to explain the impossible. 5 years after that, when Magnolia at 65 delivered their fourth and final child, a daughter they named Ruth after the midwife who'd helped bring all their impossible babies into the world, the medical journals would write articles about the Thornwood miracle, trying to explain how a woman past menopause had borne 4 healthy children to a man in his 70s. But Silas and Magnolia knew the truth. It wasn't medicine or miracle or luck. It was stubborn Montana love. It was two people who'd been told they were past their prime, past passion, past the possibility of building a family, who'd looked at those limitations and said no. It was a 70-year-old rancher who'd refused to fade quietly and a 58-year-old widow who'd refused to become invisible. It was desire that became eternal because they chose each other every single day, in the barn and the bedroom, in the quiet moments watching their children play in the Montana sunshine. And standing on their porch one evening, Silas at 77 and Magnolia at 65, watching their 4 impossible children chase fireflies in the twilight while the ranch that had almost been lost thrived under their care, Silas pulled his wife close and whispered against her hair, "Spread wider tonight, love. I'm still not stopping." Magnolia laughed and turned in his arms, her body softer with age and childbearing, but her eyes still burning with the same fire that had ignited that first night in the barn. "Promise me something, Silas Thornwood. Anything. Promise me that even when we really are too old to move, even when our bodies finally give out and passion becomes memory instead of reality, you'll still look at me. The way you're looking at me right now. Like I'm the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. Like age is meaningless and our love is eternal." Silas kissed her, soft and deep and full of 7 years of choosing each other, and when he pulled back, his weathered face was serious. "Magnolia, I'll look at you that way until my last breath, and probably beyond if there's anything after this, because you taught me something I thought I'd forgotten, that life doesn't end when you turn 70 or 60 or any other number society decides is old. Life begins when you find someone worth living for, and you, my magnificent wife, are worth living for, worth fighting for, worth planting seeds in until biology itself surrenders to our stubborn will." They stood together as darkness fell and stars emerged over the Montana wilderness, two people who'd defied every limitation age could impose, who'd built a family when the world said it was impossible, who'd proved that desire really could be eternal when backed by stubborn love and absolute refusal to accept defeat. The Thornwood legacy would echo through generations, 4 impossible children who'd grow up knowing they came from parents who saw limitations as challenges, who treated age as just another obstacle to overcome, who loved each other with a fierce passion that time itself couldn't diminish. And somewhere in the distant future, their great-grandchildren would tell the story of Silas and Magnolia Thornwood, the 70-year-old rancher and the 58-year-old widow who looked at biological impossibility and said, "Watch us." They'd tell of a man who promised to plant his seed until it took root and kept that promise through 4 miraculous births. They'd tell of a woman who carried children at an age when her body should have forgotten how, who proved that strength and determination could overcome any limitation. But most of all, they'd tell of a love that made age meaningless and desire eternal, a love that started with a desperate proposal and became something neither of them had dared hope for. A partnership, a family, a forever that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. The end. We want to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching this story from? Drop your country or city in the comments below. We love knowing our Montana timber family spans the globe, and your support means everything to us. If Silas and Magnolia's journey touched your heart, if their story made you believe that age is just a number and passion has no expiration date, if you found yourself rooting for this impossible love that refused to accept limitations, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. We bring you powerful Western romance stories every week, stories about ranchers who fight for love, widows who refuse to fade away, and couples who prove that desire can be eternal when 2 people choose each other against all odds. Your likes, comments, and shares help us reach more people who need to hear these stories of second chances and stubborn love. Subscribe now and join our community, because just like Silas and Magnolia proved, we're stronger together than we ever could be alone. Until next time, stay strong, stay passionate, and remember, you're never too old to plant seeds of love that will grow into something beautiful. Hit that subscribe button and notification bell right now, and let's build this Montana timber legacy together.